Well, welcome everybody. This week's project is replacing some fences. So I'm out working on a friend's fence. There's two of them that have been neglected for years and years. It's a cedar fence, and it's time that it's just, time has got to it. So it's just barely holding itself up. In some cases, it's actually falling apart. Probably should have been done maybe 10 years ago. So what we got is this cedar fence right here, all throughout here. We got 2x4s that are all rotted out. Some 4x4s posts that are there might be good. We got to see whether or not some of it is worth keeping or just replacing. So basically this whole line here is going to get a new fence, and then the back over here, kind of the same thing. It's rotted out to the point where the tree's holding itself up. So that's going to get all replaced. New 2x4s. Some of the posts actually are still good. So the ones that are still good and solid because they're pressure treated, they'll be just fine, and I'll leave those, and others that are just rotted as well and going to get replaced. And then you also see a section here where I got this big tree, and what I do to kind of span that, because it's not going to put a post right where the tree is, so and that sort of thing. So we're going to go ahead and get started. First thing what we're going to get started doing is ripping it all out, seeing what posts are good and what need to be replaced. So that's the first step, getting it loaded up. We recycle it, so it's going to go all to a recycling facility here in Oregon, and it tends to be cheaper that way, and it's the right thing to do than just taking it to the dump. So we'll cut it out and then see where we're at and exactly what posts need to be replaced, so we know how much to buy. So let's go ahead and get started. Well, we got everything demoed out, and as you saw, using a Sawzall and cutting out the sections was so much faster than trying to piece it out one at a time. It costs about $60 to haul all of this material to the recycling place, and then I started staging. Better plan on spending at least I was there for about 3 to 4 hours getting all the materials and that sort of thing, as well as a couple other projects. But for the most part, all of this, loading it by hand, picking the right material. If you get just like a unit of something, there's going to be quite a few rejects in that. So rather than taking it back, I picked through it and picked all the good stuff. So as much as I could to a point. Staging it, that's the first step. Rather than have it all in a pile, if I'm unloading it, I might as well take it to the area where I'm going to be installing it. So rather than handling it twice or picking it up twice, I just figure this is easiest. With the 4x4s, I was able to save quite a few of them. On this run of fencing right here, I'm going to put one in concrete right there, and there's going to be another one over there. Both of these are going to be kind of different how I install these posts. This one here, I'm going to put a 2x4 going end to end, and so when I dig the pole, I can actually screw it to that 2x4 temporarily, so I can concrete it in place. And then when that sets up, I'll take the 2x4 off and put it in on the inside with some hangers like I normally would. This one, on the other hand, is going to be different. This 4x4 is going to be offset 1.5 inches, because you'll see the horizontal rails, and I'm going to do 3 horizontal rails, not 2. It's going to go right on past and just barely butt into the wall there, but not actually fasten to the wall like it should be. So I don't want to puncture or do anything to the garage there, so I figured this would be the best way of doing that. The reason for 3 horizontals is nowadays the type of wood that we get, whether it's the pressure treated, tends to warp real bad, or it's the cedar boards. So right now they got quite a high moisture content in it, some more, some less. but they warp real bad. They got lots of knots. If you can find one free of knots, for one, it would be probably more expensive, but two, it's gonna warp less. More knots, more warping, weaker it is. It's just the supply and demand, what we have, and that's the boards that we get. And those were on sale today, which was awesome. So I was pretty stoked about that for the Memorial weekend sale that we had. And yeah, so here's the process. I'm first going to start off putting a string line going across and see how straight these 4x4s are, because I'm kind of picky and I want them straight. And I'm going to make sure that this new 4x4 that I put here is straight. So it's getting late in the evening. Hopefully I can get maybe these two in. And then first thing tomorrow, I'll be working on the 4x4s over there so I can get them set in concrete, starting to set up while I'm working on this fence back here. So I chose to work on this fence because there's just the most 4x4s that are already there and that sort of thing. The brackets, the hangers, which you can see and it's just common all over the place, are these little Simpson 2x4 hangers. The only difference I'm going to do is rather than nailing them, I'm going to screw them. So these are galvanized, so you got to use a coated screw. Whoop, that's not the one. I'm going to be using these little Torx. I love these T20 screws. They're coated, so it'll work with the galvanizing material of the hanger. And when I'm nailing them on, they're not beating the 4x4s all over the place. The other thing, the boards, I'm going to staple them on. You'll see me using my cordless nailer, brand new, never used it before. Pretty optimistic about it, but that's so it also, again, I'm not just beating on the 4x4s as I'm nailing it in place by hand. So that's the plan. Let's go ahead and let's get started. Here I'm pre-planning my layout for my posts. You're going to see that I'm going to be bracing some of the existing posts, and when I do the horizontal rails, that'll hold it in plumb where it needs to be. Others, now I'm installing a string line to see where they're at, and also I just got through putting on the 2x4, which that one's going to hold up my 4x4 post, the new one, so it can get set in concrete in line with the others. All right, so how I go about pouring posts is I got 2 bags of concrete there, and I got a bucket of water, and I'm gonna pour in some dry mix, and then a little bit, about half the mix, and then I'm gonna put some water in it. So all my mixing's kind of, in a sense, is done in the hole. Be careful not to reload that. Too much. Set up, and then and because there was always water there, as I'm pouring, water's getting in the mix and the water's raising up to the top, and it's all kind of getting some water, and as well as groundwater is going to eventually get into it and that sort of thing. So let that set up, and then some of this soil will put back around the top of it, and that one's done. So we'll work on the next one. Here I'm laying out for my new posts. Some are existing, and then also some are going to be new. So trying to make things equal, lining up so it'll work with my horizontal rails without such a big gap in between. After I got my layout done, I dig and brace for the posts, and I set them. You can see here I got temporary diagonal brace, and then that holds it up plumb. I have a string line up above that I line up so that it's in line, or if possible to be in line. And then I pour concrete around it, just like I did the other one. Here you can see putting on the brace. It holds things up temporarily, so when I'm pouring concrete around it, it's not shifting around. Each post is about 2 feet in the ground with 2 bags of concrete. So right in this section right here, I got a little crow's foot. My 4x4 is gonna go right here, and there's a concrete section right there. So rather than trying to find some sort of fastener, which would put a lot of torque on a fastener into that concrete, and it's only like 3.5 inches thick, I'm gonna go ahead and cut it out. Probably about 2 inches bigger than the perimeter of the 4x4, so that I can dig and have that 4x4 go on through. And actually, with the concrete up against concrete, it's gonna be a really strong post. I'm gonna have to do it again somewhere right over in here, and then I'm gonna put a 6x6 right in this area, so I'll have to do it again as well. And it's gonna be in line with the house there, so that someday I figure maybe we'll have a gate. So 6x6 would be better to be able to hold up a gate. So with it there, at least there's that option. I'm not going to be putting in a gate at this time, but yeah. So anyhow, get my diamond skill saw and diamond angle grinder, and then I'm gonna probably end up having to rotor hammer the corners to really kind of knock it out. So that's the plan. Let's get started. Here you can see that I've used the diamond wheel on my skill saw with water, so all the dust isn't breathing in, all that silica dust. And then as well as rotor hammering holes right in the corners to get it all the way through, and then knocking it out with a hammer or sledgehammer, and then continue digging it out. Like I said before, each post gets about 2 feet in the ground, but notice in this case, I'm right up against the existing driveway. So in line with my string lines, it might be just a little bit off, and I'm gonna have to do some shimming to bring the fence boards back in line with all of the others, making it nice and straight. All right, so there's like 2¼ inches right there, where the next post is tied up against it, and each one of these are plumb. Made sure to have them at least make sure they're plumb, not lean them out like they were and all that kind of stuff. So here what I'll end up doing is putting a 3/4 inch fence board on first to kind of shim it out, and then the 2x4 horizontal boards are just going to go butt into that 4x4, screw onto the surface of this one, and each one of these, the surface, because this is 1.5 inches here about, and then butt into this last one. So at least from the eye on this side, it all looks straight, look plumb, and that sort of thing. And then from the other side, it won't look too bad, other than it's just shimmed out. Instead of the 2x4 horizontal boards screwing into the side, they're going to be screwed onto the surface. So got my 6x6 here for a future gate eventually. And then what I maintained for my 4x4 post was an 8 foot on center dimension, rather than 8 foot in between, 8 foot on center. So each board is going to have to get cut, which I'm okay with, but if I ever have to replace it, an 8 footer will work. Whereas there's a few spots, the existing posts, it's like 8 foot 1 inch. Well, an 8 foot 2x4 won't work. So anyhow, I find that that's better in my opinion. So I went ahead and I got this string line in the very beginning. It's actually set to 5 foot above, above the bottom where the 6 foot picket's gonna go. The fence boards are 1x6 with a little dog ear. They look very similar to this older looking board here, except for they'll be brand new. So there'll be 1 foot of the board, fence board sticking up, and then 2 foot down and 4 foot down will be other horizontal rails, leaving a foot below it. Those 3 boards will help keep it from bending and bowing and that sort of thing like they tend to do nowadays. So got everything concreted in with a little bit of a slope to it. Looks like a mess right now, but that's just part of the process. That'll all get cleaned up and that sort of thing, and get ready for boards. So this side's ready for horizontal boards. Some challenges that I had with this is, see, I'm right up against the existing concrete here, and even though I'm tied up against it here, well, there's about 2.5 inches right here. Here I installed the string line for the bottom of the top horizontal rail. By doing the bottom, I'm also able to locate where the bottom of the Simpson bracket is. These horizontal rails are also to a certain length, so that if there's a post out of plumb, it can bring it in or push it out to plumb. Here you can see I had to rip a 1x6 picket cedar, so it's not rot resistance, out to the string line. Also checking it for plumb in case the top is in line and the bottom of the post is not in line. So you got to check the top and the bottom. Sometimes you install a string line at the top and also a string line at the bottom. Here I'll be continuing on with the horizontal rails, top, middle, and also bottom. 3 rails. This tree is a dead tree. You'll see that eventually there's going to be some things I'll have to do notching these trees. There's actually 2 dead cedar trees. Eventually they'll come out, but not during the project. When pre-planning your project, you'll see here my plan was one day ripping out the fence and installing posts where I could, so that I could start on the horizontal rails on one section. Before I got started on the horizontal rails on that section, I'd jump over to the other section and install the posts so that the post can set up in the concrete. All right, this other side has its own set of challenges as well. So as you could probably see here, I had to screw onto this face of it. My boards are going to go on all on this other side, but since this tree's right here, rather than cutting the tree down and whatnot, and to stay in line, I had to shim this board out, as you can see, with pressure treated, screwed onto the surface, and screwed on the surface. And then whenever possible, this is what this is going to be looking like, just with these hangers. So this is the ideally what it would look like, flush here, so my boards can go across, and then it's going to step back. That's just what I have to do. That's part of what I have to do with the constraints. These other trees here are going to have its own kind of challenges, where going up and over that, which you'll see here in a minute. So as far as I got yesterday, that was all day yesterday. One person getting the 4x4s in. That was the goal, is get those in so the concrete can get set up and nice and solid. These other 2 posts that I did the day before, they're nice and solid, ready for it. All right, so next I'm going to start installing these brackets. I'm actually screwing these brackets in with a coated screw. It's a Torx bit. Looks like this. They're 1.25 inches. They're coated because of the zinc, so it's got to be that. It can't be just regular nails. For one, it'll rust and go bad after a while. And then 2, the little Tico nails that I have, rather than trying to hammer those in, to me, it'll take a little longer, unless I had a Tico gun, which I don't. And when I'm hammering, it'll just be beating it all over the place. So that's the things that I'm just trying to avoid. So I find nowadays that I'm starting to prefer more and more screws rather than nails. So the right kind of screw. So the next thing, now I'm here, we're going to start putting on all the horizontal boards and get ready for so that we're ready for installing the fence boards. So here we go. If you look closely here, I had to notch the base of that dead cedar tree out.
so that my boards can go on by. Eventually that tree will come out and the fence will look the way it's supposed to look.
All right, so I jumped ahead just a little bit, and we're all done with the horizontal rails. This section here, I'm going to be lowering it because it's kind of a safety hazard. That fence out there, the neighbors, they're going to lower that. It's just people coming around the corner, walking to school and that sort of thing. It's too high. So that's going to get lowered, but I had to do some MacGyvering, you know, MacGyver. I wonder what happened to MacGyver. And anyhow, so to make things look straight, you can see I had to shim out, and it was out of plumb, so I had to add a little shim, and it's a 2 1/4 inches right there, and then just 1.5 inches down below. Had to add another 1.5 inches to that one. This corner here is pretty good, but sighting down it all looks pretty darn straight. After I get all the pickets on, it should look pretty straight. Right here on the corner is another area. Had to add 1.5 inches right there. Then there's about 1/2 inch right in this area to 3/4, and then back up to the top. And then from here, all the posts that I put in were plumb, but again, I had to screw into the face on some because of the constraints of the concrete down below. Had to shim this out another 5/8 and go to the surface, and then all back in line again where I could. So these, for the most part, were pretty plumb. There's one existing where I had it hang over just a little bit, so that can still be in plane, and the others not. So that should be good. A couple areas on this other side I had to do some MacGyvering as well, because with having existing 4x4s, sometimes you just got to confine to those constraints and adapt, I guess. And maybe that's the best way of saying it. So right in here, this tree's dead. It will eventually go away, but so I notched it out so my boards can go right on by. Then this one here, when I put that post in, I offset 1.5 inches so this can go right on by, and I'm not even attached to the structure, but now it's plenty strong to be able to hold up the fence. So everything is coming together. Another area I had to shim out was right here because that existing wasn't quite in line. I wanted it nice in line. Some areas like this, I hung over it a little bit, more in some areas than others. And now we're ready for the pickets. So yeah, I just talked to the power company, and they said they're going to come out and remove that tree here in the next 4 weeks or so, but I'm going to go and butt right into it as if it's not, and then fix it later on if I need to. So that's the plan. So now let's get started with some boards finally.
Here we go, filling in with the boards, having a string line at the top to line things up with, using that DeWalt cordless stapler. These staples are galvanized, so they're meant for fence boards like this. And man, I gotta say, it is nice using that than a hose.
All right, so a good practice is on each end, you'll tack a board and then run a string line or dry line, as we call it, from end to end, and that way you line up the top. I'm not worried too much about it being level or that sort of thing. I just want the tops of it to look good. So by having it in line, just barely button into the string line, then it's gonna look good in a pew. Like that. Fortunate thing, I have to do some pruning here. That way it's not right on my string line. Yeah, so now I'm gonna make sure when I attach it that I'm gonna have a strong 1/8, almost 3/16. It's summertime, they're dry. These boards are not super dry, they're kind of dry because they were all buttoned up together, so they had a lot of moisture in it. Well, they're actually going to shrink still, so 1/8 of an inch will be just right, which is about the thickness of a nail. I'm going to eyeball it, and I'm going to nail on all the tops, and then as I get over closer within reason to here, I'm not too concerned about this last piece overlapping some, because the next board behind it tucks in behind it. So I think we'll be good there. If this was a end of a wall, the last probably 10 feet or so, I start measuring. So if I need to grow that 1/8 an inch or shrink it so that it works out at the very last bit, not too noticeable. So the last little bit is a full board instead of having to rip or have a little tiny piece. So it's important for that. Yeah, so anyhow, here we go. So far, loving my cordless stapler.
Between each board, like I said, there's going to be about an 1/8 inch space. It's pretty amazing in the wintertime when it rains. These boards are going to really soak up that moisture, and that 1/8 inch space that you have in the summertime virtually goes away and gets tight in the wintertime. So if you're installing boards in the middle of the summertime and you did not use this 1/8 inch space in the wintertime, they'll actually pop themselves off the posts or the horizontal rails themselves because they swell so much. So make sure, important practice, to have that 1/8 inch space between in the summertime. The wintertime, there's another story. If you're doing it in the wintertime, you can almost have like a 1/16, just very slight gap because the boards are already saturated. If they're not saturated in the wintertime, they're going to be soaking up more moisture, so you'll have to weigh that on a case-by-case basis.
Well, as you can see, that's a wrap on our fence. We went and jumped ahead a little bit. Got that all taken care of down there. It's down lower, so you can see as you're backing out, hopefully, and see if somebody's walking around the corner. It's nice and straight. It looks good. I want to give you a kind of an angle shot at it. You can see after shimming, everything looks nice and plumb and straight. There we go. And so I'm happy with it. I'm happy that I did 3 rows and 3 rails instead of 2. 3 so much better, keeping things nice and straight. These boards nowadays aren't like they used to be, so they warp a lot more. Kind of another look at the shimming that I had to do, 2x4, so 1.5 inches, 2 1/4 down there, all to bring it back so it's nice and plumb, nice and straight. So looks good. Let's go check out the other side over there. This back here turned out really nice as well. All brand new fence. We're gonna let it dry for probably about 2 weeks out in the hot sun, and then we'll come back possibly either this year or next year, but not too long from there, and stain it to make it look like the fence over here. It just makes things last a lot longer when it's stained, and it looks good. So eventually, if we don't stain this will all turn gray, kind of like what it was, and it's just a matter of like maybe 5 or 6 years it'll be gray. So I like the look of this, but we're gonna stain it kind of probably something a little darker to match this side. But that's pretty much it. And you know, like I said, you know, there was lots of shimming, lots of modifying, lots of MacGyvering type things on this project, because I had several posts that were still good in place in concrete, so it only made sense to keep those. In order to keep those where they were out of plumb and whatnot, I had to bring everything back in line. So that was the process. Hopefully you enjoyed, And like always, be safe out there, and I'll see you on the next one.